This video contains main story spoilers from FF14 Stormblood to Endwalker.
So spirited, and yet so empty. Your friends were a disappointment. But you will entertain me, will you not? Pathetic.
Zenos yae Galvus, later known as Zenos yae Galvus, was one of our most dangerous antagonists. Since our first confrontation in Stormblood to our climactic showdown in Endwalker, we found ourselves tested and pushed to the brink by this infamous individual. The developers of FF14 did an amazing job of telling his story. He stole the show in every cutscene he was in. What I want to focus on is the origins of this legendary figure, from the moment of birth to the first time we cross paths. This is the early life of our friend, our enemy, Zenos. Zenos yae Galvus was a pure-blooded Garlean, born into the royal family that ruled the Empire. His mother's name was Wyrm Galvus. Sadly, we don't know that much about her. We do note that she passed away roughly a year after Zenos' birth due to ill health. His father was Wyrm yae Galvus, who served as High Legatus in the Imperial Army. Here you can see Zenos' family tree. Starting with Zenos, we have his father Varus and mother Carosa. Varus was the son of Lucius yae Galvus, Zenos' grandfather, and his mother was Wyrm Galvus, Zenos' grandmother. Lucius was the firstborn son of the sitting emperor, Zenos yae Galvus, Zenos' great-grandfather. The emperor had a second younger son, Titus yae Galvus, whom was married to Wyrm Galvus. They both had a son, whose name was Nerva yae Galvus. In case you are wondering about their titles, the title of Wyrm is for an imperial princess, the spouses of royal family members, as well as other members of the royal family without a claim to the imperial throne. Yae is the title given to an imperial prince, such as Zenos. It was also the title held by the sitting empress, Empress Dowager, as well as other members of the royal family with a line to the throne. Last but not least is Zos, which is the title of the current emperor. As a young child, growing up in the imperial palace, Zenos was an imperial heir to the throne. Though not first in the line of succession, he was expected to work, study and train hard to become worthy of such a position. He would see very little of his father as he grew up. Given the station he held, it's likely Varus was away from Garlemald regularly with the Legions on campaign, as well as pursuing his own political ambitions. This left very little time for Zenos. As a result, with no mother or father around, he was instead raised and taught not by parents, but instead tutors, and tended to by servants. These tutors would teach him everything, from philosophy and mathematics to the arts of war and combat. It quickly became apparent to everyone, even at a young age, that Zenos was no ordinary child. He had the mental capacity to learn quickly, regardless of the subject. He would find his lessons to be dull, and he would often be found studying alone, draining one book after another. Given his standing and the unique nature of his upbringing, Zenos would be introduced to many children around his age, who were brought into the palace specifically to spend time with and study alongside him. But like his tutors and servants, he found these children to be boring. He likened them to automatons, who spoke and acted the same way around him. Zenos at this time would be described as an exceptionally bright yet joyless child. He had little need of innocence or playfulness like others of his age. In fact, one could even struggle to call him a child at all. One thing did mark Zenos from a very young age, which would remain with him for the rest of his life. Whenever he slept, or even napped, he would be greeted with memories and visions of a world burning. He never had an explanation for this, and would not receive one until later on in life. This unique upbringing would be the seeds that would be planted within him, that would one day shape who he would become. These seeds would only begin to sprout when Zenos was 14 years of age. On a day like many others in Zenos' self-described life of tedium, he would be introduced to a new tutor, a man who would help shape his destiny. He went to the training hall, expecting to be taught the same old lessons. "Arm yourself," a stranger ordered him. Standing before Zenos was a foreign man whom he did not recognize. Small in stature, yet well built, his copper skin was a rare sight this far north. The lack of a third eye on his forehead gave away that the man was not a pure-blooded Garlean. Zenos would pay the man little courtesy or interest, but would indulge his request, and walk to the rack to pick up a sword. A different tutor, he thought, for the same old lesson. More tedious hours of being told how to hold a blade, and how to stand. As Zenos reached out, before he could grasp the hilt, bang! Zenos found himself face down on the floor. What in the world? Confused about what just happened, he attempted to stand. In that moment, he felt the floor shift beneath him and he fell once more. He laid there. The pain in the back of his head meant he'd been struck, but he didn't even see it coming. "You are dead," the foreigner said as he stood over Zenos, his voice betraying no emotion. He then spun on his heels and strode off. "Wait, we haven't even started," Zenos muttered groggily, trying again in vain to clamber to his feet. Not even sparing him a backward glance, the tutor said, "The dead do not learn, they sleep." This nameless tutor, as savage in Zenos' eyes, would proceed to best him in combat each and every time, utilizing techniques he had never seen before. For days, the lessons continued, with the result being the same every time. Zenos could not defend against his tutor's strikes, and paid the price for it. The 10th day of training ended with Zenos limping back to his chambers, cradling a throbbing shoulder. As he walked the lonely hall, a voice echoed out from behind him. "How goes your training?" asked his father Varus. Though his clothing hid the many welts and bruises now covering his body, Varus had been receiving reports from his son's servants. He already knew full well about these daily thrashings, even permitting them to continue. He was the one that sent this new tutor in the first place. Zenos paused, then turned to face his father. "Very well, father," Zenos replied while giving him a smile. Turning again, he would continue onwards to his chambers. He gave his father the answer he expected. Yet within his heart, Zenos was more determined than ever to learn the secrets of his tutor's strength, and to defeat him. Outside of his lessons in the training hall, Zenos would spend much of his time in the Royal Library, a repository of all Garlean knowledge, and that gathered from other lands, subjugated or otherwise. For many nights he would study, searching for any clue about his tutor and the arts he wielded, until in one book he finally found the answer. The arts were called the Unyielding Blade, which hailed from Corvos in southern Ilsabard, a region now under Garlean control. This was also the region that his tutor originated from. Now with a name to guide him, he redoubled his efforts, searching for other references or instruction on the subject, but found very little for his efforts. Rather than give up or feel frustrated, this search gave Zenos a thrill he had not felt before. This quest for knowledge had turned into a hunt. Zenos' first true hunt, and he relished every minute of it. Now knowing what to look for, Zenos would return to the training hall for his next lesson. He made it his mission this time to observe every movement the Corvosi made. The novelization stated it best. From his footwork, to his stance, to his strokes, he drank it all in as a thirsty man drains his cup. This continued on for days, Zenos watching him intently, even leaving himself exposed to receive more of a thrashing than he did before. But finally, he had it. The secret was unlocked. His observation and study finally paying off. At a later lesson, he entered the training hall. His Corvosi tutor stood at the ready, waiting for Zenos. "Arm yourself," the Corvosi ordered. Taking a sword from the rack, Zenos stood ready to face him. Zenos watched him carefully. They stood 10 paces apart, well out of melee range for one another. But to Zenos, it didn't matter anymore. The Corvosi stared at Zenos, until suddenly, with a wave and a flash, Zenos unleashed an energy wave from his sword. The wave cut right past the Corvosi, who rushed to dodge it. Surprised, he turned to Zenos. How did you do that?" The man could not hide his shock at having his own technique used against him. Something he thought impossible just happened. A pure-blooded Garlean used a sword technique that required the manipulation of Aether. "You seem surprised. Why?" Zenos asked. "Do not insult me, boy," he answered back. "The unyielding blade is not for the likes of you to wield." The confrontation continued, with each of them exchanging attacks. The Corvosi used technique after technique, with each energy wave he unleashed being countered by Zenos with energy waves of his own. Driven into a corner, the end result was Zenos plunging his Aether-charged sword into the Corvosi's chest. When he fell to his knees, Zenos knelt down and whispered into his ear. "The dead do not learn. They sleep. Is that not so?" He didn't respond, however, and slumped to the ground with the sword still lodged in his chest, eyes open but unseeing. Zenos stood up and opened his palm, revealing a glinting Aether crystal embedded into his own flesh. This was the secret to how he used the sword technique, utilizing the crystal to manipulate his own inner Aether, channeling it into his blade. This was a dangerous gamble, but one that paid off for him. He could have easily killed himself in the process. The arts of the unyielding blade had been passed down in Corvos for millennia. His now dead tutor was one of, if not the last, with the knowledge to teach it. Zenos, however, was able to learn it merely through observation, and using a rather ingenious method of Aether manipulation. Looking upon the Corvosi's corpse, Zenos thought to himself about the 2 lessons he had learned through all of his training. First, that the inability to manipulate Aether is a vexing disadvantage, one he will work to address. The second, that was battle didn't offer him the euphoria that the tales would often speak of. The hunt, however, was something that thrilled him heart and soul. Taking the crystal from his palm, he tossed it beside his dead tutor's corpse. "Your payment for these 2 lessons." Zenos left the training hall and returned to his chambers. He bathed, ate, and readied himself for sleep. As he lay in his bed that night, he was ready to sleep more soundly than he ever did before. He wished that one day to cross paths with a foe that would offer what he desired. As he drifted to sleep, Zenos' lifelong hunt would finally begin. In the time that would follow, Zenos would fully adopt the arts of the unyielding blade into his own fighting style. Although he couldn't fully utilize it yet, it was a key component in his fighting prowess. When he became a man grown and completed his studies and training, he would join the ranks of the Imperial Army, and be given a high-ranking position befitting one of his standing. In the year 1552 of the 6th Astral Era, the Garlean Empire led a successful campaign to conquer the nation of Doma, and with it, the entirety of Yanxia. This rule would last for over 2.5 decades. Its king at that time was Cayenne Regin, the father of Hien. In the wake of the occupation, Cayenne was made the deputy viceroy of Doma, and for the sake of his people, he collaborated with the empire. Yet behind his open subservience, Cayenne was secretly planning for his nation's liberation, and formed and coordinated the Doman Liberation Front. This leads us to one evening in a Doman tavern. Within a private room of this establishment sat Zenos, now the legatus of the 12th Imperial Legion, currently assigned to Doma. Within this room sat two more individuals. Cayenne, the Deputy Viceroy, and Yotsu, the same woman who would one day bring misery to the Doman people. Yotsu at this time was a courtesan of some influence. She was recruited by the Liberation Front to glean intelligence from any visiting Garleans. And on this night, her next target was to be none other than Zenos. But much to her inner rage and cursing, he would not cooperate with her. In this room, which was comfortable and well heated, Zenos sat fully dressed in his signature armour. Any drinks he partook of were taken in a gauntleted hand. He may have been physically in the room, but Zenos found no interest in any of his distractions, least of all Yotsu. At one point, the Deputy Viceroy excused himself from the room, leaving Yotsu to her task. She handed him cup after cup, which Zenos would drain empty as the hour drew late, much to her exasperation. "Will this man ever get drunk?" she annoyedly said to herself. A storm was brewing outside. As Zenos looked at the window, he finally spoke of his own accord. "What manner of place is this, Doma?" As she agonized about the proper answer to give, as well as the true answer she carried in the pit of her stomach, Zenos met her gaze for the first time. "I am weary of empty chatter," he warned, clearly in no mood of a fake answer. Zenos had already seen right through her, and seen the bitterness that lied behind her facade. This piercing gaze into her very soul was enough for her to drop the act and speak her mind about her true feelings for Doma. In fact, the very reason she was doing all of this in the first place was because she was actually an Imperial spy. She inserted herself into the Liberation Front and became useful. As they tasked her to learn Garlean secrets, she performed her true mission of taking theirs and providing them to her masters in Garlemald. As Yotsu continued to speak her mind, Zenos spoke again. "Ah, there you are," Zenos stated. "It intrigues me to see a woman struggle with such rage, when tradition dictates that she appear meek." This opened the floodgates of Yotsu's black heart, and she began to spew forth nothing but rage and hate for her country and their traditions. It was during this tirade that Zenos finally rose to his feet. Gazing out the window, he thought to himself that his evening's entertainment had finally arrived. His main reason for still being fully armoured was approaching. "Waiting on the storm to cover their approach," he murmured to himself. At that moment, the windows of the room smashed, and several dark figures rushed through. With weapons drawn, they surrounded Zenos. Yotsu took cover in the corner of the room and observed. "Assassins," she thought to herself, given their dark garb marked them as shinobi. but her gaze then settled on their swords and the way they carried them, which was definitively imperial. Zenos was surrounded on all sides. What's more, his gunblade was propped against a far wall and out of reach. He gave them a bored look, clearly unimpressed by the situation, before addressing them. "Lord Zenos, slain in the arms of a Doman courtesan, yes? Such a scandal is worth the ignominy of failing to protect a royal guest." The assassins closed in, and all struck at once. In Yotsu's eyes, they all fell upon him at once. But as quickly as they struck, they would all instantly pause. Moments passed, until all at once they slumped lifeless to the floor. In the middle stood Zenos, holding one of the assassin's swords in hand. I had hoped this land on the brink of rebellion might offer some measure of sport. He looked upon the failed assassins. But if the Viceroy imagined any handful of hired knives sufficient to remove me from the hunt, I have sorely overestimated my prey. His gaze then settled on Yotsu, whose face was stained red with the attacker's blood, and a wicked smile on her face. Fascinated, he strode over to her as her smile widened. "What is your name?" he asked. This would mark Yotsu forever, and she would redouble her efforts to truly come into the Liberation Front services, with the goal of providing Zenos and the Empire with all of their secrets. As to the identity and origins of the attackers, while Zenos originally thought they were in the employ of the Viceroy of Doma, who would love nothing more than to see him dead, events playing out in Garlemald offer a more plausible explanation. As Zenos sat in the tavern that evening, time was running out for the sitting Emperor. Solus yae Galvus was on his deathbed, and the War of Succession was already being fought in the shadows. Zenos' father Varys was next in line for the throne, as his own father Lucius had died from an illness years before. Titus yae Galvus, the second son of the Emperor, had other plans. The main hurdle for him was to overcome the fact that Varys had much more influence in the Imperial army, and also had a strong heir in Zenos. It's very plausible that the assassins could have been sent by Titus to remove Zenos from the succession, and thus weaken Varys' position. Given that Caian had announced publicly to be a supporter of Titus, it's also possible that the order to kill Zenos was given to the Deputy Viceroy. Only Titus or Caian would have known for sure. In the weeks that would follow the assassination attempt, Emperor Solus would pass away. As the succession for the throne was disputed and civil war began, Caian seized the opportunity, with the Liberation Front rising up in rebellion to drive the occupation forces out of Yanxia. However, the events played out much faster than anticipated, and Varys claimed the throne of Garlemald. Now known as Varys yae Galvus, Emperor of the Garlean Empire, he issued a command to his son Zenos, now heir to the Garlean throne, to restore order in Doma. Zenos gave the order to the 12th, and they marched upon the battlefield to quell the rebellion. On the field of battle, Zenos would prowl, like a beast stalking its prey. He would cut down many fighters that crossed his path, until he faced off against Lord Caian in single combat and defeated him. He and the 12th then put down any last remnants of his rebellion that dared to stay on the field. As he fought, Zenos would develop an interest in the samurai sword, for he had crossed paths with them all throughout the battle. Up until this point, he had been wielding a Garlean gunblade, and utilising the etheric arts of the unyielding blade. It's not clear how he managed this, but it's speculated that it had something to do with the ammunition he could load into the gunblade. We saw Gaius van Baelsar perform similar techniques with his gunblade. During the events of the rebellion, Zenos would save the life of a Doman conscript in the Imperial army, by the name of Asahi. though Zenos barely acknowledged him, as saw he would fall under his spell, following and worshipping him until his dying day. After all was said and done, Zenos was named Viceroy of Doma in order to keep it under heel. Yotsuyu would take her place at his side as Deputy Viceroy, to bring hardship to the people and country she so hated. For Zenos, the position of Viceroy never interested him. It was only the hunt that satisfied him. He applied his unyielding blade art to that of the samurai sword, and also developed an interest in storied or powerful blades. When he found a more powerful blade, he would discard the old ones. His goals in life were unchanged: to overcome the limitations of the Garlean race and be able to manipulate Aether, and thus be able to use magic and techniques. Building upon his experience with the Aether Crystal when he was a boy, he commissioned the Imperial Magitech scientists and engineers to build for him a method to imbue his blades with Aether. Drawing upon his interest in the samurai sword, they would develop for Zenos the rotary electro scabbard, which many would later call the sword revolver. This is the sword scabbard we see Zenos with in combat, which holds 3 swords. The electro scabbard functions by sheathing the swords next to etherically charged crystals of varied elements. When the sword is in the sheath and the scabbard spins, the blade becomes coated in aspected Aether, which Zenos can then draw and utilize the techniques of the unyielding blade. This is why we see Zenos sheath and draw different swords in combat, drawing again once it's coated in enough Aether, or if he needs a specific element for an attack. The swords played a key role as well, with each being special in their own right, but also having elemental affinities of their own. With this scabbard, Zenos overcame the limitations of being unable to manipulate Aether, thus allowing him to fight at his art's full potential. But even this was a means to an end. After the fall of Gaius van Baelsar and the 14th Legion, Zenos would be named by his father as Viceroy of Alamigo. Before departing, however, he would name Yotsuyu as acting Viceroy of Doma in his place. Events were beginning to stir beyond the Alamigan borders with Eorzea, which piqued Zenos' interest. Another war and a continuation of the hunt. Before taking his post, Zenos would visit the Imperial Academy to test out a new prototype of his electro scabbard. It was during this visit that he chanced to meet with a Magitech scientist by the name of Aulus. Aulus was a designer of heavy artillery. In secret, however, he siphoned funds meant for artillery into the research on the Garlean genome, with the goal of giving Garleans the ability to manipulate Aether. Zenos was impressed by Aulus and saw potential in his research. He took him under his wing, elevating him to the rank of Mal. He was now Aulus Mal Alcina, Chief Magitech Technician. Shortly after these events, Zenos would come into possession of Gaius' reports on Eorzea, in particular those concerning the Echo, which he saw as a key component in his plans. He thus put Aulus to task of discovering its secrets. Zenos was located in the throne room of the Imperial HQ in Alamigo, when news arrived to him about the battle between the summoned primal Shinryu and Omega. He ordered his troops to hunt them down so he could use them to his own ends. He was more interested in the coming of the Eorzean alliance, who had taken Baelsar's wall, and were amassing on the border. A new hunt was beginning, and one that promised to bring forth new prey for Zenos, one that may finally give him the challenge he so craved. His wish would finally be granted after so many years, when he and his 12th Legion attacked Rhalgr's Reach. It would be there where he would cross paths with the Warrior of Light, the one who would become his greatest enemy and his first friend.
Farewell, my friend.
first friend.